Hello, everyone. Welcome to JSJC's Data Dialogues. As many of you know, JGU has launched India's first postgraduate program in data journalism. Onwards to the commencement of this program, we are checking in with some senior journalists who have been producing data driven news even before its emergence as an important aspect of the field. Data Dialogues, as many of you know, sorry about that. Okay. uh, yes. So, onwards to the commencement of this program, we are checking in with senior journalists who have been producing data driven news even before its emergence as an important aspect of the field. Our guest today is Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, editorial director of the Business Standard. Mr. Bhattacharya was awarded the Shri Ram Lifetime Achievement Award for excellence in financial journalism in 2017. He has written The Rise of Goliath 12 Disruptions That Changed India in 2019. His upcoming book, due this year, captures the story of India's finance ministers. And as you can imagine, as an economist, I'm very excited about that. In conversation, we have my colleague, Professor Uttaran Dasgupta, who is an assistant professor at JSJC. He's a New Delhi based journalist and a writer, and he has written he has worked in several national and international newsrooms, among them the Business Standard. Uttaran is a Chevening Fellow as well as a Robert Bosch Media Fellow, and he's also the author of The Visceral Metropolis and Ritual. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Uttaran Dasgupta in conversation with Mr. A.K.
Thank you, Ruchida. And thank you, sir, for joining us. Just to add to what Ruchida said, Mr. Bhattacharya was also my editor at Business Standard when I joined Business Standard in 2014. And he has been a sort of a mentor to me. So I'm really happy to have him here. Welcome to JSJC, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Call me AKB, Uttaran, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. Make it easy, you know.
And, it would, of course, be very nice. It would, of course, be very nice to have you over on campus, and we hope to do that as soon as the campus reopens. Just to begin, just from a personal point, I was a humanities student and I had no idea about data. I balked at numbers when I joined Business Standard, and it was at Business Standard that I started appreciating how important data was to understanding the world around us. And data journalism and precision journalism is something that's new. It's an exciting field for journalists, which is why we are starting our course. But financial journalists like you, sir, you have been using data, analyzing data for many decades now. So I'd like to give us a picture of how important you think data is for financial journalists and for journalists who do not usually deal with finance. And how have you seen this change over your long career?
Okay, thank you, Uttaran, for having me here. This is a subject that is very dear to me. So I will consider this as a privilege and an opportunity to share with you and through you, your colleagues and the students of your university, how important and how critical data is for understanding almost everything around us. I would like to make a basic distinction between data and data journalism, because data, as in data, is where it stands, and I think we need to give it the kind of importance that data should enjoy, whether in the form of the census data, the government data, the survey data. So data in themselves are very important. But when you combine journalism with it, I think it acquires a life of its own. And we need to recognize it, that when journalism and data they combine themselves, and then what you see is actually a kind of a new power to journalism, which journalism without data will not have. So when you have journalism based on anecdotes, journalism based on perceptions, journalism based on interviews, they are one kind of journalism. But I think when journalism is equipped and armed with numbers, data, and their understanding, I think journalism acquires a kind of an arsenal which is very difficult to fight. So therefore, we should not ever underestimate the importance of data in journalism. That's my primary point. I mean, there was a time I remember when election coverage was virtually devoid of data. This is the pre-Pranay Roy days in India. Pranay Roy was the first, I mean, I would call him a journalist in many ways, who brought in data into electoral coverage. Before that, our elections used to be covered by constituency visits, meeting the candidates in fray, talking to Mrs. Gandhi or Mrs. Gandhi's other leaders and everything, and write about them. But I think from the mid 80s or the late 80s, one saw the advent of data in electoral journalism. In a sense that when you are covering elections, data began playing a very important role. So I think when you combine data into election coverage, you realize that what a powerful piece of journalism will emerge, and compare the kind of constituency visits, talking to people, coming back, talking to the rickshaw puller, and talking to the local dhaba man, and come back and write his perception. But interspersed with data about the constituency, data about the performance of the constituency in terms of economy, in terms of its demography, its age profile, you will see a different kind of reportage. So there is no doubt that data in itself plays a role, but when data starts informing journalism, journalism acquires a new identity in itself. And I think we can never underestimate the importance of data. Over the years, of course, when I began my journalistic career in the 70s, I think data was not playing that big a role for a variety of reasons. One, data was not that easily available. Those were the pre-internet days where data was contained, in the annual publications of the government or annual publication of the Reserve Bank of India, which you need to lay your hands on before you can actually, access them. And also, there were no Excel sheets. So technology was something different. So you could not use the data that you can use today in the post-internet days. One, technology. Two, the easy access to data. So when you ask me to talk about what was data journalism like in the early days, and now the big difference is accessibility to data and the use of technology. I think these two things have made a big difference to the role of data in journalism. There was a time when if you wanted to know what was India's gross domestic product in 1975, now I had the only way I could have access that data was go and search, go to the library or go to some place and get hold of the old economic survey or get hold of the old RBI state of the economy and then look at that data from there. But today, access to data is so easy relatively. I go into the computer and click on that, I get it immediately. So my journalism is hugely benefited by this access and technology to data. Now, I don't know whether I'm speaking more than what I am supposed to.
No, this is
But
perfectly fine. This is very interesting.
so this is, this is, so I will just, in the preliminary, in response, since your main question was very broad based and had a broad scope, let me give you, there are 4 or 5 basic principles in data journalism or data use, in my view, that I have always benefited from. Now, now one is that it's very important before anybody can use data is to understand the definition of data. When I say that the definition of data, what I mean is this: that when you are looking at the data on, let us say, the non-performing assets. Now, it is very important for a data journalist or a journalist to understand what is a non-performing asset. Going beyond, what is the difference between a gross non-performing asset and a net non-performing asset? Because as I said, that journalism gets richer by understanding the data, but also it gets even more rich if you know the definitional differences of those data points. So you will be able to understand the significance of a number of 7% gross NPA and a 4% gross NPA. So to a lay reader, 4% gross NPA and 7% net NPA will not make any difference unless the data journalist understands the difference. And so therefore, he takes his viewer or takes his reader into confidence and places that in the right context. So it is very important at the primary stage is to understand the definitional aspects of data. So if you are talking about gross domestic product, you must know what are the key elements of a gross domestic product. You must know how the gross domestic product is different from a net domestic product. If you know the difference, then the understanding of data will be even more rich. Example, net domestic product does not have data on what is provided for renewal of old assets. Gross domestic products does not have that. So if you see the huge difference between gross domestic product data and net domestic product data, you will immediately come to the conclusion as a data journalist, okay, hey, this country is not providing for the future in terms of renewal of assets. In other words, a country whose gross domestic product is 100 and net domestic product is 90, and in the 5 years period, it becomes 110 and net domestic product remains 95, then you will say it is not providing enough for the future in terms of renewal of capital. And it is very important for maintaining growth. So therefore, definitional aspects are very important in understanding and drawing inferences from data. So that's the point number 1. Point number 2 is that a data journalist must always realize the importance and significance of the general versus the specific. And in a different ways, it is also the dilemma of the overall versus the granular. When you are looking at, as I said, the GDP data, you are saying, oh, GDP has grown by 6%. That is the overall figure. That is the general figure. But data journalism cannot stop there. Data journalism has to go beyond it and drill into that GDP composition and say, what is the granular data? What is the specific data? how much has manufacturing contributed to that GDP? Because manufacturing will let you know the jobs, how many jobs were created, how much of has been investment. So if you are only happy with getting the general data, you will get one kind of journalism. But if you want to get a more refined, a bigger understanding of that data, then you have to go into the specific data, the granular data, to understand what is the investment rate, what is the rate at which manufacturing sector is growing, what is the rate at which electricity sector is growing. So you will have to drill deeper into data to enrich your journalism, data journalism, even more. So that is my point number 2, that you must be conscious about, apart from knowing the definition, you must know the general versus specific and the overall versus granular. My third point is that one needs to be little wary of the headlines. Do not get taken in by the headline. If you go in by the headline, then you will be missing the real story. I mean, the headline number, which very often the data agencies, whether it is the government or the non-government, the survey organization or what, will not tell you the full story. So data journalism is never complete if you only are satisfied with the headline number. The story is never in what is the gross NPA number or what is the total unemployment number. I mean, if you are looking at the unemployment number, for example, the latest figures or unemployment by the CMI tells you the unemployment rate is falling. But as I said, that go into the specific figure, go into the granular data. Now, if you go into the granular data, you will realize that yes, unemployment rate is falling, but the labor participation rate is falling by a higher margin. Now, if the labor participation rate is falling by a higher margin, in other words, the denominator and the nominator problem, which means that actually the fall in unemployment rate is actually illusory. So good data journalism cannot rely on the headlines. It has to go into the specifics so that the meaning of that data is brought out. And finally, I would say that it is very important to not be satisfied with the data of one point. In a sense, very often, we journalists are far too focused in the present, in now and what is the current data. Now, the data is incomplete if we're just looking about the data of a certain point. Data makes sense only if it is seen in a time series context. So it's very important to see the same point of data, to see what happened last year at the same time, what happened the year before, what happened the year before that. So if you don't do that, then my understanding is that data journalism will suffer. So it is very important to capture and understand data, in a time sequence. You may not always share that time series with the readers if it is not necessary for whatever brevity reasons or space reasons, but it must be there in the back of the journalist's mind. This is I mean the famous the story about Flaubert in what is the storyline. He told Maupassant that what do you see from outside your window? Maupassant told him that he sees a tree. So Flaubert told him, no, you don't only see the tree. You see the sky behind that. You see there are some clouds in the sky. And you don't forget that there is a crow sitting in the tree. So you cannot, data journalists cannot ignore the entire context. You must see the context and then share with the reader what is relevant. So that's a very important point. I think I gave you a very long answer, but I thought it was necessary to start this discussion.
Thank you so much. That was quite a comprehensive answer to my question. And one of the most exciting definitions of journalism that I read this year was that what is news? News is data placed within a context. And I think that's what the point that you ended on about data. And it was reminding me of those sessions we would have in the conference room before the budget, where you would explain to us the difference between looking at the budget estimate and the advanced estimate and the revised estimate, and then looking at this year's budget estimate. So thank you very much for that conversation, for that answer. One point I noted while you were saying is that data gives journalism an arsenal which it wouldn't have without data, which brings me to my second question. One of the reasons that data journalists are so obsessed with data, in their own words, is because anecdotal journalism or narrative journalism often goes away from from their vow of non-fiction into the realm of fiction. And there is this a temptation to focus or to privilege the narrative over the facts. However, data itself also seems to go into this realm of fiction. Just after this year's budget, Professor Jayati Ghosh wrote an article saying that the budget is actually a work of fiction. It is no more facts alone. And data from, I think now, of course, all countries have had their credibility challenged. Just this year's trust report by Edelman says that trust is falling in all countries. So I would like to ask you about how do you, look at data and understand whether you can trust this data, especially in geographies where data has been, like India, China, our neighboring countries, where data has been not so good or not so solid. How do you as a journalist, do data journalism in these kind of geographies?
I will tell you that data has always been doctored or misused or presented to justify or sell a positive story about the government in place, not just now, but for centuries, in my view. As long as the governments have been in place, they have always used numbers to suit their political purposes. So it is not that earlier governments, whether in India or outside, did not use numbers to suit their story. Was Green Revolution was a big success? Well, it was a big success, but if you drill into the data, it was also a failure because it only benefited the rich farmers. And now if you get into the data of Indian agriculture in the post-Green Revolution phase, that data numbers will come out. But at that point in time, no government ever said that Green Revolution is only benefiting the rich farmers. The poor farmer remains poor and marginal farmer remained marginal, actually became more marginal. So the point I'm making is this, that data is often used by the governments to serve its own interest. That has been happening for quite some time. Now, what is important to note that is in the last few decades, journalism has been gifted with two special tools. One is technology, which is how you can use data. And second is because of that technology, your access to data is relatively easy. So with the access to data and the technological tools by which you can splice that data, you can understand that data in various ways, you can probably find it easier, if you want to do it, to describe what is a fiction and what is not a fiction. Now, my reading is that earlier days, it was more difficult to dissect a piece of data that is dished out by the government and say, listen, this is wrong. This is something incorrect. But today, with access to data, with the use of technology, in data technology I'm talking about, you can actually come out very quickly. Like you said, Professor Jayati Ghosh did come out with that piece of us, wherein you can actually say that, listen, the claims made by the government on the basis of the data that you find is actually, is not genuine. Which is why I will come back to my original point that you must have the data competency to understand that how is the government or anybody using the data to serve its own interest. Now, to give you an example, there was this big controversy about the budget having given a huge increase to health budget outlay. As it turned out, that the health outlay did not go up, actually it went down. Now, the point I'm making here is this, that if a data journalist is aware of definitional aspects, if the data journalist is aware of understanding that how do you read data, I don't think a data journalist on that very day would have made the mistake of believing the government's claim on that very day. For example, when the government claimed that the health outlay has gone up, it worked out a very clever thing. It changed the definition of health outlay. It included health and well-being into it. And by that, it brought in many other elements which were not there in the traditional health outlay thing. So you change the definition. Now, the moment you change the definition, as a data journalist, you should say, hello, you're not comparing, as they say, like with like. You cannot do that. That's number one. Number two, you should not be comparing, as in the budget estimate should always be compared with what you have spent last year, not with the budget estimate. Now, the government has traditionally been doing is you compare budget with budget, but that's a wrong thing. You must compare your projected number with the latest number that you have in your possession. So, if a journalist, a data journalist, is aware of the fine points of this data display and the data compilation process, my sense is that the fictional aspect, the fictional elements of government claims can be easily be exposed, which is why I say that yes, all governments we will keep doing it. Everybody, even why government, companies do it. Companies present data on their corporate performance to suit a kind of a story that can fetch them a better stock market price. But it is the job of a data journalist to look into the data to find out, to say that, hello, your last year's income included a one-time extraordinary income. This year, that income is not there. So please compare like with like. So there are so many ways of exposing the claims. At times they are false, of whether it is the corporates or whether it is the government. But then you need the tool of a data journalist, which I mentioned, that you look at the definitional aspects, you must differentiate between the general and the specific, and identify the big changes. Don't go by the headline. These are the basic kind of the good manufacturing practices, good hygiene, as I say.
Yes, good hygiene.
Yeah.
One of the points that you mentioned just now was that technology, which allows us to access as well as splice data. Yeah. But to my mind, technology is a sort of a double-sided sword, because while it allows me to access data, technology also allows, on one hand, an overwhelming amount of data. We live in a world where we are overwhelmed with information and data, right? So how does a journalist actually deal with this information? Because journalists are working at a faster pace because of closer deadlines, 24/7 newsrooms. So how do I use this technology to understand what the technology is throwing back at me? One. And the second question that I have is the ethical aspect of it. Because data is so easily available, I might come in possession of data that may not be ethical for me to write about or to publish as a journalist. So how do I deal with it? What would you think should a journalist do with it? Should we, do a sort of self-censorship and take an ethical call, or should we just go and say that it's freedom of the press?
Let me address your two questions one by one. I think it is important to keep the basic the skill sets in mind. While doing data journalism, you cannot be in a hurry, because it is important to understand that when you are dealing with data and writing on the basis of data, the credibility that you enjoy is hugely more than if you were to write something without data. So when you are using data, you must be more responsible. So when you are saying something that this company has been making a claim about a profit of 10% every year, but actually those profits are derived out of its interest income every year, not real manufacturing, not real business. So long-term growth is not sustainable. Now, it is very important for you to check it once, twice, three times before you make that claim, because you're making a claim not on the basis of somebody saying or something like that, but you're making the claim on the basis of data. And people have great faith in numbers whenever they're put out. That's number one. Number two, you cannot underestimate the importance of the source of data, which is why I keep saying that whenever somebody is using data, whether it is in a graphic or whether it is in a story or whether it is in an essay, you must reveal the source of that data, because it is as important for you to know the source of data as it is important for the reader to know that source of data. So, and when you give the source of the data, one of the reasons why I personally force journalists to give the source of data is also to make them realize that, listen, when you're giving the source of data, you have done some proper due diligence. What kind of diligence have you gone into the primary source? And when you are giving the budget number, did you go to the finance ministry site? Did you go to the indiabudget.gov.in site? Or when you are giving the GDP numbers, did you go to the MOSPI site and did you get the data from there or not? Or did you go to the RBI site? So, the source of data is very important. So that's number two. And number three is that when you are interpreting data, that interpretation of data is also can be subjective. I mean, for example, if you want to interpret data in a certain way, that certainly is possible. But then what happens is, if you are given the source and you have given the raw data also, then anybody who reads it can actually make out that what may be the element of bias in their interpretation, because the data is there. So that's what I would say in response to your first question. The second question is actually is a very, very, very straightforward answer. I don't think there is there should be any dilemma over not revealing certain kinds of data. If you do get a kind of data which is reliable, which is coming from a reliable source, from from a survey, and the data that is being given by an agency, whether it is a government or a private sector agency. So once you are giving all those necessary checks and balances, I don't see any reason that why one should be ethically in a dilemma not to share that data, whether it is a question of data about riot victims, whether I mean, you may have some dilemma about whether you would like to reveal the identity of the community to which the person who is victimized belong, and that those are different things. But in terms of data, if you have got the data of which is damning data for anybody, I think the data should not lie, and data should be shared without any hesitation. The problem arises is when the governments don't release data, then the real problem arises. There have been occasions in the past where the government has chosen not to release a certain set of data, and that becomes problematic. So there, I mean, there are leaked data. There are, reports that appear that data from this agency was not officially released, but was leaked by some people. But then disclosure is very important, and the disclosure comes. So I don't think ethically any journalist should refrain from sharing numbers just because those numbers can be disturbing to anybody.
Thank you so much, sir. I have actually a lot of follow-up questions, but I think we are also nearing the deadline for our session. So I will ask one last question.
Yeah.
And then I think I shall throw it open to questions by my colleagues, by people who are in. One last question is, even when I became a journalist 10 years back, most newsrooms had people like me who had come from a humanities background, who had no skills with programming or coding or splicing data understanding, or even with Excel, right? But now newsrooms have changed dramatically. And people are using these new tools because it is essential to make the experience of our readers, who will probably be reading it online, more immersive. And it's possible to make it more immersive. Mm-hmm. So how important do you think it is for a journalist to learn skills such as data visualization, coding, etc., to become a successful journalist, not only a data journalist, but a successful journalist as such?
Well, I think, with increasing availability of these tools, I think the ability to use a software like InfiBeam or Data Wrapper, anybody is using computers these days. Now, those software are very easy to use, in my view. So data visualization these days, thanks to technology, once again, I would say, is not a very difficult challenge for a journalist. And I think it's a very, very important tool in the hands of today's journalist to visualize one's own data. And the beauty of that is that when you visualize your own data, believe me, you get to understand the implication of your data in many ways that you yourself had not visualized while you first looked at those numbers. So therefore, it is important for every journalist, forget about data journalists, to know how to use these data software like InfiBeam or Data Wrapper. Many of those software now freely available. Some of them are at a cost, but I think learning them doesn't take more than an hour or two. So I think it's a wonderful tool. Every journalist, why data journalist? Every journalist. I mean, a person, the country is going through a census now. Now, when the census data comes out, it will tell you so much about this country. And imagine the significance and the benefits the journalist will get if he or she knows how to use that data from the data software, the census data. So there's no doubt about it. The second point is coding. I think coding is slightly more difficult, but I would say that given the time and that we are living in these days, it's like in our time that we used to ask this question that please teach him English and mathematics. I think these days kids are told when they are in their toddlers that does he know coding? So I think coding is becoming like your mathematics and English those days. So therefore, it will not be a bad idea to make coding and basic coding really a part of the training kit for journalists. As a matter of fact, in business standard, we are creating a small data team, and we are making sure that all our team members have the basic coding skills. So, and it doesn't require much effort to learn coding these days.
Right. Thank you so much. That's so interesting to learn that Business Standard also has a team that's learning coding. I know Ruchira has learned R. I am learning Python. But we have questions from our students already. Ruchira, would you like to come in and be the voice of the students and pose them to AKB?
I would love to. I'm having some issues with internet. It seems to be a problem in our neighborhood. So I'm surprised that Uttaran is still holding on with the internet being how it is. Yeah. Nonetheless, here is a question from our student Shardul Srinath. Shardul himself is very interested in data journalism. He is, he's one of these young people who are who are really curious about it and are really interested in innovative types of journalism. He says, while I understand that journalism primarily uses public data, I would still like to know what your views are on the concerns of data privacy in today's world. Data gives power, but it can be misused also.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very, very important point. When we are talking about data,
you want to come in?
When I'm talking about data, I don't think we are talking about private data. I'm not talking about your income tax data or the data about where you visited and how many times you logged into a certain site. So I think such data, which are talking about an individual's habits or individual's activity, I don't think that data can ever be compromised. But unfortunately, in an environment, in a country where data privacy laws are nowhere near where they should be, I think these things are just, 2 days ago, I got myself tested because I was traveling. So I got myself tested on RT-PCR. Now the RT-PCR COVID test. Now within a few hours of that test, I started getting SMSs from all kind of test providers that I can provide you test at this price. Now, what is it except that it's a data misuse in my view? Who has a right to share that data that I went in for an RT-PCR COVID test, and that data has been shared with other test providers? Now they are using it for business. Now the question is that yes, data privacy is important. Data privacy is important for private data, individual data, but if the data is anonymized, if the data is saying that, if the data were to say that out of 20,000 people who went abroad, went for an RT-PCR test to a private lab, not to a government lab. Now that is an anonymized data. That is not giving me data about whether A.K. Bhattacharya went for it or not, but that gives me the data that 70% of the 80% of the people went for private sector guys for their lab test. Only 30% people went for the public sector labs. So that tells me a lot about the country's infrastructure capacity. So private data, a strict no. There is no need for my income tax data or your income tax data to be revealed. But certainly public data, which is wholesale data, that helps you understand about what is happening in this country. So I entirely agree with you. Private privacy, data privacy is a huge area of concern. I think we need to really fight hard on this front to make sure that our data privacy concerns are addressed. But at the same time, I would say that when we are talking about data journalism, we are not talking about private data. We are talking about data that is publicly available and that tells you about a society as such in a general data, in an aggregate sense, not in a specific sense. I hope I addressed your question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's another question from our other student, Satvika Mahajan. Satvika is General Secretary of the Student Council and very active, very important voice of the students. Started denying data just to cater to personal sentiments or feelings. So, what can we do as journalists to ensure that people understand the authenticity?
It's an important challenge. It's something that authenticity of data is a responsibility of the journalists. There's no doubt about it. Whether it is hurting personal sentiment, if it is hurting personal sentiment or feelings, I think journalists must take due care in not presenting the data in a way that individuals are affected. But when it comes to providing understanding of a trend, I don't see a problem there. But I think journalists must understand that they cannot, deal with data that is not authentic. So, as I said, that a data journalist cannot be in a hurry. He has to make sure that data remains authentic and remains his understanding and analysis of data also remain authentic.
Last question is from me.
Sure.
So today I was looking, I've been looking at the budget for quite some time now since it's come out. And I recently found out that the government over the last year's budget allocated 100 crore rupees to incentivize girl children to carry on in secondary education. Of that, the revised estimates were 1 crore. So they promised 110 and they revised it downwards to 1 crore. And I, of course, thought it was absolutely shocking. People are losing their jobs. The most, poor daughter school. That's my hunch. My student, on the other hand, has another interpretation of the same data. She says that, you have to give the government a chance. They only announced the scheme in 2020. And, you can't expect them to meet their spending targets by 2021. And when I talk about data, annoying that in part there are so many interpretations and
I think Ruchira is having some trouble with
internet.
Yeah. No, I broadly got the sense of the question. I would not agree with your student. I would rather agree with you. I think of course the government is within its rights to not spend the money. But if it had allocated a certain amount for a scheme to be spent during the year, it should have spent that money. There is no doubt about it, So the revised estimate from 100 crore to 1 crore is very shameful in my view. What is worse is that, remember that the government budgets are all lapsable, in a sense that if you are given 100 crore and if you don't spend it by 31st March, that money goes back to the Consolidated Fund of India. It does not remain with you to be spent next year. There is only two allocations which are non-lapsable. One is the Northeastern allocation, the allocations for development of Northeastern states. They are not lapsable. In a sense, they remain with the ministries, even if they have not spent it. And the second one is the new fund that has been created this year, which is for defense and internal security capex. Now, apart from these two, every fund that is not used by 31st March just goes off. So if for that scheme, which was a laudable scheme, good scheme, now if the government could not implement that money, it shows a very poor absorptive capacity and administrative inefficiency of the system to implement that money. So there's no doubt that it reflects governmental inefficiency. And government should not be given a short shrift on that. Yeah.
I think Ruchira would be very happy to hear that.
No, I agree. I think you should tell the young student, which is a very good thing that students in general university speak. Which is a very good thing. Students must speak out their mind. I'm glad they, and also some of the questions that I got were very, very perceptive.
Yeah, I think you will get many more questions because nowadays everybody's watching these things asynchronously. Sure. But I think this has been a great talk, and thank you so much for coming, AKB sir, and helping us out with.
Please call me AKB. Everybody, Uttaran also calls me sir. I don't know why he calls me. Call me AKB. Uttaran, please. Otherwise, I'll call you Mr. Dasgupta, and I'll call you Dr. Sen.
Thanks a lot.
I'll call you Ruchira. I always call Uttaran. Uttaran has been a wonderful colleague, and he says he learned from me, but he doesn't realize that I also learned a lot from him.
Thank you for your kind words, AKB, and we hope to have you soon on campus. We are hopefully opening the semester and continue with the discussion as and when that happens. And thank you, Ruchira, for organizing this session. I think a data journalism course is very exciting, and we're ready to really take off with it now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.